join us on the program right now. The editor-in-chief of Officer.com, Mr. Frank Borelli. Frank, good evening, sir.
Good evening, Cam. How you doing?
I am good. Thanks for coming on the program tonight.
Always a pleasure.
I said to the audience at the beginning of the program that I'm sure by now they're tired of hearing me say that the way you deal with violent crime is to go after the people who are committing those violent crimes, not the lawful, law-abiding gun owners. So I decided we could have you on the program so you could say that tonight. There were a couple of stories that I saw over the weekend that just really struck me as to, the gun control advocates insisting that things like in New Jersey, a one-gun-a-month law is what is needed to make these communities safer. When you have these towns that are controlled and run by the gangs to the point that witnesses to a murder are being intimidated, hours after they go to the police and they say, okay, I'm ready to help and I'm ready to testify. They go back home. All of a sudden, they're getting threatened by gang members.
Well, when you need the police, when you need help in seconds, the police are minutes away, I think is the old saying.
Yeah.
It's a shame that it happens, but, gangs are a much larger problem than is ever going to be resolved by a one-gun-a-month law or any kind of gun rationing, for that matter. By the same token, if we had every law-abiding citizen with guns available to them, concealed carry permits and everything else, I hate to say this, but, you've got to have the fight in your heart to take the fight to the bad guys. And then that's a bigger challenge I think we face right now in our country is too many people who want somebody else to solve the problem for them, and there's a lack of personal responsibility for our own safety.
Absolutely. This a couple of reporters in New Jersey doing what I think is a pretty good story on the gangs in the Garden State, Andrea Clearfield and Matt Payas. They point out that according to the 2009 National Gang Threat Assessment, gang members commit 80% or as much as 80% of the crime in communities across the country.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that is an incredible number. They quote a gang member called P, who lives in New Jersey, and he said, quote, "We're in the nicest neighborhoods, the best schools, colleges too, where street life goes, violence goes, just wait."
Yeah, and it's been spreading when you think about it, and I think I'm familiar with the article that you're talking about, and gangs did start out in inner cities, and now they're spreading to anywhere where their criminal enterprise can make them money. And that is in our suburbs. It's in our rural areas. It's a shame to see it spreading like that, but it's not something that just purely the police can put a lid on. It's something that's going to take a concerted effort from citizens and police alike.
Yeah, in this story, there is a quote from a nationally recognized gang expert named Edwin Torres, and he says, "How is it acceptable that we're relinquishing our fundamental rights to freedom without a whimper? How is it acceptable that we can't go here, that we can't wear that color, that we have to close down a school for a day because of gangs? How are we allowing this?" And, I think there were a lot of Americans who would listen to that and hear that and say, well, heck yeah, but what are we supposed to do? Like, Frank, what am I supposed to do?
Well, and again, this goes back to what I said about having the fight in your heart. If you're asking what can I do, and the obvious answer is you've got to be willing to stand up and fight for your family, for your community, for your county, your town, whatever. If you're not willing to stand up and put up that fight, then you've already lost it. Because the people who are willing to prey on you, they're not hesitating to do violence to get what they want. If you're not willing to commit acts of violence back in self-defense of you and your family and your way of life, then you've already lost that fight.
Yeah, and it seems like a lot of the job that has to be done is the job falls on the shoulders of parents. You've got to make sure that your kids don't get involved in a gang. There's another quote by a member of the Latin King, and he says, quote, "Kings are very versatile. Financiers, sometimes those bigwigs are Latin kings. We've got kings on Wall Street. They're recruiting in high schools. They're recruiting in colleges. The federal gang assessment talks about some of the crimes that they commit. We think of, the armed robberies, the drug deals, home invasions, but insurance fraud, mortgage fraud, identity theft. I mean, these gangs are multi-jurisdictional financial empires in the black market.
Absolutely, they're just a new type type of organized crime, if you will. What we used to picture the mafia doing, per se, that's what some of these gangs are doing now. And it's not just domestic gangs, it's gangs that we're now importing and coming from other countries. And, they're all becoming part of this melting pot that is the greatest country in the world, but we have to face our challenges that come with that, and we offer opportunities that aren't always legal, and if we're not standing up against that crime, then we're becoming willing victims of it.
Yeah. Now, there was another story that I saw over the weekend out of Los Angeles. There's a program that I guess was supposed to be implemented, and I guess maybe it was implemented back in 2007. It was called the Home Tracking Plan, and the idea was that this would take nonviolent offenders out of the Los Angeles County Jail and place them in home detention on electronic monitoring in order to reduce the early release of jail inmates. The problem is, Frank, they can't find enough inmates that are eligible for this program. Too many of them have violent records in their background. And there was an incredible quote by the sheriff spokesman, Steve Whitmore. He says, quote, "The myth of the low-security, nonviolent offender in jail is just that, a myth." You agree?
I think that agrees to large numbers of the inmates in the jail. I think, sure, there's probably a few inmates that are in there that they don't have a violent background. All their crimes are theft, and it's all been property crimes or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that's the majority of them. I think that's a small minority. And I think it's funny that it takes somebody either with 5 stars on their collar or a law degree to believe that releasing somebody from prison with a pager on their ankle, if you will, is somehow different from releasing somebody from prison without it. Last time I checked, release didn't change the definition in the dictionary depending on how you dress somebody. And they'll argue semantics, but the bottom line is if you want to keep violent criminals off the street, you keep them behind bars.
Mm-hmm.
You don't try to restrict them to a certain area and govern their movements. I mean, come on, Cam, I'm a parent, and my 12-year-old knows how to manipulate his phone better than I do so that he can escape me tracking him with the GPS that's built into it.
Right.
If a 12-year-old can do that, hardened criminals that have been educated by each other in the system can do the same thing.
Well, and what's scary to me and what the Los Angeles Times doesn't really get into, they kind of allude to this by quoting a state senator, Gloria Romero. She said she suggested the sheriff review whether he could safely expand the program to other inmates in the jail. In other words, the people with violent backgrounds who are not currently eligible. And that, Frank, is what's coming. Particularly in California, where they're facing, huge budget deficits. They're already talking about releasing tens of thousands of inmates from the state penal systems early. If the fat has been cut, so to speak, the only thing left now is to start putting more of these violent offenders back on the street even earlier than they should be out.
Absolutely. We had one of our writers wrote an article about the perfect storm, and it was a combination of all the budget cuts that are taking police officers off the street because we're reducing our numbers while we increase the numbers of convicted felons that are going on the street because the prison system's budgets are being cut, so they're having to push people out the door faster. And when you have more predators on the street and fewer people protecting the citizens, then you have a recipe for disaster. And what's really sad is in California, they go out of their way not to empower the average citizen to be able to defend themselves against these convicted felons. I've got a friend, my business partner lives out in L.A., and he can't get a carry permit. The guy's an honorably discharged Navy vet, never ever had a criminal problem in his life, wants to be able to defend the lives of him, his daughter, and his wife, and he can't get a carry permit, but we can put 20,000 more convicted felons out on the street to prey on them. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, you're exactly right. In fact, we were talking about New York City. I guess their homicide rate up 20% over last year, which, to be fair, was the lowest, I guess, in 40 or 50 years or so in New York City. But it's still up this year. Fewer officers on the street, and Bloomberg says that, by the end of this year, quite frankly, they could have as many as 5,000 fewer officers than what they have right now. But it's not like he's going to, make the gun laws in New York City any better for residents.
I was about to say, but you're talking about Bloomberg. His answer to everything is melt every gun on the planet and you'll do away with crime.
Yeah.
Because Bloomberg doesn't see into the hearts of human beings. And if there are humans in the world that will always be predators. They were just raised that way or not raised by active parents, and that's how they grew up.
Mm-hmm.
And there's one solution to violent crime, and that's responding with greater violence. You know, I mean, and this is a tale I think you've heard me tell before. I've taught my children this. If you can walk away from a fight, walk away from it. If you can't walk away from it, talk your way out of it. If you can't walk and you can't talk, you damn sure better win with speed of violence and aggression. That's the only way you beat a predator.
You know, and that makes a lot of sense. I mean, from a law enforcement perspective, Frank, how do you put that into effect to go after these increasingly violent criminals and these gangs that are taking over communities?
It has to be a partnership between the police departments, the sheriff's agencies, you know, the citizens and the communities that we work and live in. But you know, a lot of times that means that we law enforcement officers have to lose some of the us and them mentality that we sometimes have, and we have to welcome those law-abiding citizens in to work amongst us and help us out and provide us information and not treat them as if they're separate and apart. You know, it means accepting that controlling crime is the responsibility of all of us working together against the criminals, and it's hard to do sometimes.
All right. Well, Frank, again, I'm really glad you could join us on the program tonight. Let's do it again soon.
Always a pleasure, Cam. Just give me a call.
Thank you, sir. Frank Borelli from the outstanding website, officer.com.